That's a little too advanced for this class. It's a little too advanced for this class. Take a print production class if you want to learn about slides.
I already know enough about slime slugs.
All right, and then you are going to create your document. This is your interface for InDesign. Please set your InDesign to Essentials Classic if you want to follow along with my setup. Essentials Classic is the basic design setup that I use for all of my demos. Mostly, not because it's the best. I have different setups that I use for different things, but for the sake of learning the program, it's the easiest to follow. So with Essentials Classic, I just want to make sure I'm giving you the information in the order I gave it to you. The next thing, before we start designing this, designing the imagery, designing the text, we need to create our layout. So we have to do two things. We have to learn what our master's pages are, and then we have to set up a grid. So, anybody know what master pages are? So a master's page is a page that all subsequent pages will utilize. So if you have page numbers, if you have, you ever seen a book that has the title in the bottom or at the top corner on every single page? That is master's page. It's something that needs to appear on every page, every layout. So page numbers, titles, things like that. But also, most importantly, what appears on your master's pages is your grid system, because then it will superimpose that on every single layout. How you get to your master's pages are on the left menu at the top, you have something that says pages. It looks like two little pages. You guys can see that up there? Right here?
Yep.
Where I'm circling. Everybody sees it? You hover over it, it says pages. You're going to click that, and it's going to open your pages dialog.
You said
So-
left top?
Right.
Right.
Top. Did I say left?
Yeah.
I meant right. Pardon me. I'm actually dyslexic a little bit. I go like that when I'm driving, which is really dangerous. To go like that while your hands are on the wheel. Figure out which one is left.
Small world.
Anyway, when you open the pages menu, it looks like this. So you have page 1 and page 2, because those are the two pages that you created. One's the front, one's the back of your postcard. But if you look at the top here, you have this thing that says A master. That's your master page. Because you don't have facing pages, you only have one master. If you had facing pages, you would have two masters, one left and one right. But because we don't have facing pages, we only deal with one master page. To edit anything on your master page, you have to double click that section. So if I double click that, it highlights blue. If that's highlighted blue, that means that right here, I am now working on my master's page. I am no longer working on my layout. Once you are into your master's page, you are going to create a guide system. So you're going to go to Layout, Create Guides.
Yeah.
So what are we doing from layout, create guides?
Did you get that far in your notes?
Yeah, I did.
Then now we're waiting for everybody to finish writing. Everybody's there? Everybody's
Yeah.
caught up?
I am.
You good? So when you click that, it opens a new dialog. So in your guide system, you have what are known as columns and rows. They're exactly what they sound like. One is horizontal lines and one is vertical lines. The reason we use a grid system is for placement, so that we create some kind of visual hierarchy. If you look at that typographic sin poster over there, how many columns does it have? Those of you that can see it from where you are. 2. So it's using a 2-column system. Not just the text in the middle though, because if you look at sin is utilizing the second column. So, rows are a little less necessary. They're a little more forgiving than columns. Columns, the up and down structure, if you look at your handout, the up and down structure is more important for hierarchy. The row system is more for placement. I use it as kind of like a visual rule so I know where the center of everything is. So for me, and what I'm going to recommend for those of you that have not had typography yet, which I think is all of you for the most part, or if you're not super comfortable with this concept of grid systems yet, Just make 2 columns, 2 rows. That's what I'm going to do. So if you notice, because I have preview checked, when I create my 2 columns and my 2 rows, you're going to get to see them behind the dialog. Now you want to do 2 different things right now. You want to first, if you have a margin, you probably want to utilize the margin as your endpoint. So I have it fitting my guides within my margin, which means from here, the peak line is my margin, to here, it is the exact same distance as from here to the other peak line. Those are both the exact same space. If you snap to pages, which we're not doing for this project, but you can do going forward, now the space goes from here to here, and here to here, to the end. With a 2-column system, that does not change your width at all, because it's the same distance. But with anything more than a 2-column system, you have spreads that appear in the middle, that do not anchor on either side of the page. If it doesn't anchor to the side of the page, that's where snapping to the page and snapping to the margins makes a difference. Because if you snap to the pages, your middle columns are going to appear smaller, even though they're the same width, because they don't have the end of the page to consider. So, I always just think it's a good rule to snap to margins. Okay? The second thing that you need to decide is what is your gutter going to be. Everybody sees that space in the middle, the little tiny sliver of space on each column and row? That's your gutter. It's typically empty space, negative space. The purpose of a gutter is, consider a newspaper. You have text. Big newspaper. We've all seen a newspaper before, right? I know you guys have probably never
On
read
TV.
newspapers. On TV, Jesus Christ. So-
Well, who reads newspapers
Anyway,
anymore?
so with a newspaper, you will have the headline, but then you'll have columns of text that go down and go down and go down. Because the eye can only read so long, realistically. It's somewhere around 4 inches is the natural reading line length. Anything more than that, and your eye can't go from here to here easily. It gets confused as to what line it's on if it's more than 3 or 4 inches. So then you have to create columns to make your lines of text readable. If you have columns, you have to have this space in between these columns of text to separate it. Otherwise, my eye is going to keep trying to read. So gutters are used to separate segments in your layout. That doesn't mean that you have to follow the gutter every time. There are situations where if your gutter is right there, it doesn't mean my text, my body or my header has to stop there and then drop down. There can be situations where I go over the gutter. That means I'm utilizing more than one column intentionally. Again, if you look back at that poster in the back of the room, the word typographic goes over the gutter. It utilizes 2 columns instead of 1. So it's important to know what the gutter is for, but it's also important not to let the gutter confuse you. If you do not need a gutter for this system, you can turn your gutter off. All you have to do in your columns or rows is just turn that to 0. I personally like a gutter. I like having that extra space to help me break up my system. So I'm going to turn, for me, my gutter at 1/8 of an inch. So this is now what my layout is going to look like for my postcard. This helps me in this postcard setup to only have 2 columns, to only have 2 columns. Anybody know why?
No.
Because I can't do anything on the back of my postcard right here, because that's where the address goes. So it's a visual layout. It tells me right from the get-go where I need to separate information. So once I have my system, I can hit OK. What I have to remember to do is after I utilize master pages, and then I'm done, once I've done my grid system, I need to remember to get out of master pages. Otherwise, anything I do, if I design right here, it's going to appear on both the front and the back. So I have to remember to switch now to page 1. Just double click and make sure that one's highlighted blue. Now I'm back on page 1. I'll zoom out so you guys can see what I'm talking about. See how I have page 1 and page 2? And see how their grid systems looks exactly the same? It's because I edited it in master's pages. So I get to see that both pages have the exact same information.
How'd you switch
You just have to double click.
Double click on page
Pages
1.
menu, you
Yeah.
just have to double click back to page 1.
Okay.
The same way you entered master pages is the way you leave master pages.
Good to know.
Alright, so now I have my document set up. So what's the first thing I should do now that I have my document set up?
Save.
Save your file. So you're going to go to File, Save As, just like every other project, every other program,
Yes, file save as.
and then just title it. I'm going to title it Postcard. And where do I need to put this? Inside of the postcard file I created. So I'm going to find that on my desktop. I made a folder that says Postcard. I don't want to put it inside of my assets. Images go inside of the assets. The postcard should be in the same folder as the assets. So I'm just going to click on my postcard folder, and then I'm going to hit Save. So what I end up getting, if I look at my postcard folder, I have postcard folder. That's postcard folder. There's the file I just created, and there's my assets folder. Inside of my assets folder are all of my illustrations completely isolated. Now you're ready to start designing in InDesign.
Yeah.
What's that sound?
That was somebody saving their file. So, the first thing that I need to understand how to do in InDesign is place an image. Just like when you were placing images in Illustrator, you go to File, Place, Command D, Apple D is the shortcut. You're now going to find your image in your Assets folder. So if I'm on my desktop, I need to find the folder that says Postcard, and then I need to find the folder that says Assets, and within that Assets folder I can place my AI files. So I'm going to place the flower I just created. And then you get this dialog. Do you see how my picture is kind of floating around with the cursor?
Yes.
I have to decide where to drop it. So you can place two different ways. This is very important to understand. I can just simply place the image anywhere, then I have to resize it. So now I have my image placed, it's huge, still on page 1. Now I have to resize it to fit into my frame. Resizing in InDesign is so complicated, it's ridiculous. If I just pull from the corner and hold shift like I'm supposed to, right? Because it keeps it in ratio, I'm actually cropping the image, not resizing.
Oh.
So how you resize in Illustrator or in InDesign is you have to hold Command and Shift
Hold.
when you pull from the corners. So Command and Shift, and then you pull. Now it will resize the image. I can also rotate from the same dialog box. I don't need to hold anything to rotate. I just need to hover outside of the corner of the image that I placed, and I can rotate my image.
Was that whole command and shift?
Hold Command and Shift when you need to resize. That's extremely important because otherwise you are not going to be able to change any of your illustrations. So that's one way of placing and resizing an image. I'm going to delete that and show you the second way. Second way is, so if I place that image and then I don't want it to be so huge, I'm just going to really quickly show you before I move on to the next one. So if I place this right here, let's say I didn't rotate it. Let's pretend it's still straight. Place my image, but you know, everything that's outside of the red isn't going to exist anyway, because nothing exists outside of that red bleed. Then I wouldn't have to hold Shift or Option, and I can mask my image. So if you just move the edges, you are masking the image, hiding it. It still exists. It exists behind that line. The second way you can place imagery is by first creating a shape and then placing within that shape. So if I go to the shape tool, which is right here, it's just the rectangle tool. If I click and hold it, rectangle, ellipse, and polygon exist. Those are the three basic shapes in InDesign. Rectangle and ellipse are probably the only shapes you'll ever use. 90% of the shapes you use are going to be rectangles. So I'm going to create a rectangle shape. Because I know I want that image to fit inside of my bleed, I'm just going to draw a square that fits my bleed. Now I have a rectangle that exists. It has no fill and no stroke. It's just a rectangle. You can still place inside of a shape if it has a fill and a stroke, but it will lose its fill. And then you can add it back. You can add back a stroke. You can add back all of those elements. I find, and this is a personal preference of mine, it is not an industry standard. It is easiest to place into a completely empty shape. No fill, no stroke. I find it simpler, easier, less chaotic, less hectic to just do it that way, because then you don't have to remember to turn off the stroke if you don't need a stroke. If I leave the stroke on there, but it's a very thin stroke, I may not notice it,